Okay, so this one is almost so common that I didn't even talk about it. But since I've got a lot of new subscribers out there and a lot of new students, I'll go ahead and talk about some of these like really common idioms. Okay, this is big fish in a small pond, or small fish in a big pond. Okay, this analogy is often used. This kind of metaphor. Right behind me, we've got a. This is the biggest fish in the pond, right? And let's imagine. Let's take this out on a bigger scale. We take this fish out of this small pond and put him in the ocean, and there's a whole bunch of big fish out there. He's not going to feel so special. He feels like, special now, right? He feels like the top fish. But if you put him in the ocean, he doesn't feel like anything special. Also, we want to think about the idea that in a small pond or in a small body of water, the fish tend to stay smaller. Whereas you go out into the biggest body of water, which is the Pacific Ocean, that's where you're going to find the biggest fish, because uh, that's just the way nature works, right? And that's the way society works too. So let's say, for example, like a kid who's pretty good at, let's say, mathematics in high school, if he just stays locally, and now I don't think mathematics is really the best idea, but okay, then he goes to like, let's say, for example, if he goes to a local university, he might still be like a big fish. He was a big fish in high school, and he's gonna still be, you know, a big fish in a local university. Okay, but let's say he goes to MIT and he's around all of these other amazing people. He's going to need to up his game. That's another idiom. Up his game in order to just be one of the medium-sized fish there. Does that make sense? Okay, so this goes for a lot of things, right? So let's say, for example, a person who is Japanese, if they go to America to study, then when they come back to Japan, then they're going to be they're going to have up their game so much. Let's say it's a doctor, for example. So they go to America. The doctor goes to America, and they learn all kinds of new skills from like in the medical community. The that's the biggest pond is the United States. That's where all of the action is. So when they go to the biggest pond, they go back to Japan, and then they're kind of like one of the top, most respected doctors, right? Because they learned all these skills in the bigger pond. Does that make sense? So uh, the thing of it is like, let's say, for example, you're the top baseball player in your local community, for example. Then you go to like university, playing university baseball. You might not be such. You might not be important at all, right? You might just be an average player. So you are a smaller fish in a bigger pond. So they always use this analogy. So let's say, for example, a politician who's not so significant on the national level goes back to a local area, they're going to be a bigger fish, right? Because they spent time in the bigger pond. Does that make sense? And So I've got some examples for you. Let me make sure I got this set up. Okay, so we've got the best baseball player in the minor leagues goes to the majors. So he was once a big fish in a small pond, and he goes to the majors, and now he's a small fish in a big pond. So he's going to have to up his game in order to play with the, you know, the major league players. Or let's say an average player from the major leagues. Okay, here we go. A guy, maybe he's an average player in the major leagues. He played for 1 year, goes back to his hometown to work, and plays for the local team for fun. He's going to be a huge fish in a small pond. Okay. Always using that metaphor, big fish in a small pond. Okay. I said this before. One of the better students in high school goes to a big city to get to attend a high-ranking university. Okay, then he's not so smart. This kid had like the best English. Let's say it was not an English-speaking country, right? And he had the best English in his whole high school, and then he goes to a big high-ranking university, and he realizes that he's just like nothing, right? He's just, everybody's good, right? Here's another. This is a perfect example. The best English speaker in an EFL program goes to America, and people don't even notice his ability because he's in the ocean right now. You're like, it's expected that he speaks English, and he's with the biggest fish, which are the native speakers, right? So, but then let's say he spends several years in the United States speaking English every day, and people still, like, the native speakers still like dominate him in a conversation, right? Then he goes back to his Hungary. Let's say he goes back to Hungary, right? And he's like the best English speaker in town. You see, so went from being a small fish in a big pond to being a big fish in a small pond. Okay. Here's an example. So this lady is recommending that you go, instead of trying to go to a big city like New York with your abilities, why don't you go to a smaller community, and then that way you can be a bigger fish in a smaller pond instead of going to New York and struggling with all of those other huge fish.
You're a big fish in a small pond. We all also want to go and live, like we all want to live in New York or Miami or
Yeah, so she's naming all of the big cities.
LA or big cities, when in fact, you could live in Asheville, North Carolina, or Bentonville, Arkansas, or all these other places. Move there as a young person and crush it quickly.
See?
Is it easy?
So she's saying instead of going to New York, Miami or whatever, then go to one of these smaller communities and crush it. Crush it means to succeed. Crush it or kill it, right? So that's a perfect example.
Said he's a big fish in a small pond, but I think
Okay, this is so common. Big fish, small pond. This is 69, but this idiom is so common. Here we go. This is coming from a movie called Big Fish. And when they named the movie Big Fish, every native speaker knows that they were referring to this idiom.
You were a big fish in a small pond, but this here is the ocean.
You were a big fish in a small pond, but this here is the ocean. He's talking about probably maybe, who knows? I didn't see this movie, but let's imagine that you are, let's imagine that you're in some kind of a local community acting troupe, right? Where there's like a local theater, right? And you're one of the best ones, the best actors in that theater, where they put on shows for the local community, right? But then you go to New York, and you're just like, you have no status whatsoever. So you were a big fish in a small pond, but this here is the ocean, right? Okay. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, I think I covered everything, actually. Okay. Uh, so what's the good point and the bad point? So let's say, for example, if you go to you were a bigger fish in a small pond, you feel special and you feel confident and you feel like, the best. But you're actually not growing because there's nobody else to teach you things, or there's nobody else to challenge you, right? So if you're a doctor in Mexico, in a small town, let's say, for example, in Mexico, you might be one of the most respected doctors in that community, right? But then you become, like, let's say, stale. You don't learn, but then you go to the United States and you're working with, let's say, surgeons. Let's say these genius surgeons that all of this information is going back and forth. You're gonna up your game. Here's one problem, though, is that this is getting into these social things, but let's say if you were in this bigger pond, right, in a big city, let's say, and then you go back to your hometown, those hometown people are going to be jealous of you, right? Possibly, right? Some people are going to admire you, and some people are going to be jealous of you. This is another thing. It's like, I know this girl who was working for a bank in Chicago, which is really like a huge banking world, right? So then she returns to university to get, maybe, I don't know, to increase her qualifications. So she gets a job at a local bank in that university town, which is a small pond, right? Theoretically, she would be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. But what happened, she said, was that these other fish, got real jealous of her, right? And they tried to make her life difficult. So, it's a double-edged sword, I guess. All right. So, all right, I will talk to you on the next idiom.